I'm rolling.
Today we're going to cover the Dezurik butterfly and plug valves at the Upper Blackstone Phase 3 project. Here's the highlights of everything that we're going to cover: the AMA electric motor actuators, the PEC's instruction manuals and the drawings, the electric motor operator portion drawings, along with the BAW drawings and instruction manuals. We'll start out with the PEC's for use with a nut. This is just a 2-inch nut operated actuator. Looking at the first drawing, you got the open stop, closed stop, gland bolts, and your gland. If you have to adjust the packing on these, if you're experiencing leakage, loosen up the jam nuts that hold down the gland, tighten, apply pressure to them until leakage stops. Once leakage stops, quit. Do not apply too much pressure. And when you tighten these, apply them evenly so as to not pinch the packing. Here's your open stop. If you adjust the open position to 50%, that's where the open stop is, and the same on the closed. You can adjust that if you need to apply more pressure into the seat or back it off. Here's a basic drawing of a PEC with a nut. If this head ever becomes loose or wobbled, inside here there's a stud that gets attached to the upper plug. It's got 5 Belleville washers and a nut in there. Tighten that nut until the Belleville washers compress, not allowing this to be sloppy. It's not going to affect any of the operation unless you over tighten this. If it's loose, it's not a big deal. It just for preventative maintenance, it's always good to have everything snug and tight like it should be. Once again, here's the open stop, closed stop, packing adjustment. Inside the bonnet, there's a friction cone. It allows for easier operation, open and close. If the valve ever becomes hard to stroke, that friction cone may have cracked. You'll have to remove the 2-inch nut assembly, get down to the gland, remove those 2 nuts, take the gland off, and that'll expose the friction cone. If there's a crack in it or any residue or buildup from whatever's in the media of the pipe, it will work itself up eventually into that packing. If the friction cone is broke, I would suggest replacing the packing along with the friction cone, and then just rebuild your actuator from the top up. Put your gland on, snug it down. Don't go too tight. It's better to have that loose and have a little leakage than to over tighten it and break the friction cone when you're reinstalling everything. Put your 2-inch nut operator on it along with your Bellevilles, then your closing torque nut. Tighten everything down until everything's snug. Make sure the valve operates smoothly, and you're ready to continue operation. This is a more in-depth, detailed drawing of the actuator nut that we just discussed. Here once again is the operating nut, the Belleville washers, the stud that goes down into the plug journal, your closed stop, open stop, gland assembly with your gland adjusting studs. Now we're going to cover a G-Series actuator. This is a common actuator for the order that was placed. It's a gear series worm. It's got an adapter, housing, cover. Here's the packing adjustments on a G-Series. The only difference between a G-Series packing and a 2-inch operating nut packing is that this one does not have a friction cone. It's direct pressure onto the packing, which compresses and opens it up, allowing no leakage. This G-Series is for use with a chain wheel. You want to always make sure it's got a safety pin in the end of the chain wheel. That way, if this valve is ever put into the air and operated via chain wheel, that if the pin that attaches the chain wheel to the shaft lets loose, that safety pin is going to stop it so it doesn't allow the chain wheel to fall off and injure somebody on the job. They all come with an open, closed pointer indicator on top. Most of the time you won't see that due to this actuator being up in the air. The gears are all lubricated at the factory for lifetimes of operation. The only time they will ever have to be re-greased is if these 4 bolts are removed and the interior of the gear is exposed. You'll always have some grease separation due to the storage on site prior to install or even during operation. Grease will separate over time. You can just add more after removing the excess separated grease. Maintenance as far as anything other than the separated grease, the interiors of these, this input shaft drives a small worm gear, which in turn drives a larger bull gear. The only maintenance that will need to be performed on that is if the input shaft gets bent. If it does get bent, you'll have to remove, there's a set screw over on the side, remove that set screw, and inside the worm gear there's a small pin. You'll have to drive that pin out and the input shaft will be able to be removed. Install the new input shaft, repin it, put your set screw back in, reinstall the cover, and maintenance is complete. Here's a more elaborate drawing. This has the same G-Series manual actuator. This one, of course, comes with a hand wheel instead of the chain wheel. Here's the set screw that I was just talking about, along with the pin of the actuator. In order to repin this, you may have to take this bull gear out. It all depends on the angle in which you can get at it, if you can drive it out this way. I've done them both ways, either with the gear in or without. This drawing also discusses the chain wheel option along with the actuator, as well as a 2-inch wrenching square. All the gears are operated the same no matter what they have on it for an input. Chain wheel, manual, hand wheel, or the wrenching square. Here's a detailed side version of the G-Series actuator on the plug valve. You got your nut on top, your Belleville washers, your 2-inch wrenching square, that's where your pointer is, and a stud, all-thread stud that goes to the top of the top journal of the valve. You got your packing gland, your packing adjustment nuts, and once again, when you adjust packing on these, adjust them evenly side to side so you don't put any undue pressure on the packing. Your bonnet bolts. On the 6-inch PEC valves, they use the same bonnet bolts go through this adapter that go into the bonnet and the valve body. You cannot remove those without having pressure de-energized in the line. 4, 8, and 10 and on up, you can remove the actuator without removing the bonnet bolts. There's 2 separate bolt circles on those, just to give you something to be aware of when you're removing actuator components. This is another breakdown of the PEC with the G-Series actuator. This one just shows the 2-inch wrenching square. Packing adjustment, closed stop. There is an open stop, but it's internally on the cover. So right about here. It will max out, so you cannot open the valve too far or come back open with it. Down in the left-hand corner, you'll see a drawing of the possible rotation, mounting rotations. Right now this valve is shipped out in standard. If you want to go to the 90 or 270 option, you'll see on the bottom left corner, the 90 and 270 positions require different internal gearing. These positions must be noted on the purchase order. If you find out in the field later on, after the valve's been in operation for 5 to 10 years, hey, you know, this valve would work better in the 90 or 270. What you do to change that gear, it's a different bull gear internally. You remove the four screws holding the cover on. That allows you to get access to the bull gear. Remove the bull gear, put the new gear in, reinstall your cover, and the operation's complete. It's always best when you open up one of these actuators to put the valve in a noted position. I always try to put the valve in the full closed position. The plug isn't going to move if it's wrenched into the seat. You're able to do your work, and you know exactly where that plug is when you go to return it back to service. Right now we're going to cover, it's a Stonell position feedback for use with a G-Series actuator. A common application for these position feedbacks is on pneumatic operated valves, but they are used with manual operated, as you guys have out in the plant. It's basically, here's a detailed and large drawing of the attachment, how it's attached to the valve. You got your stud that's driving your position feedback, and an adapting square, a jam nut, and then this is attached to the stud that gets attached to the upper journal of the plug. Here's a more large version showing the adapter along with the actuator assembly. Inside, there's a stud that is attached to the lower bottom end of the position feedback, goes up, and there's two cams operated internally that open and close switches. The top is always set for close, the bottom is always set for open. They can be ordered vice versa, unless they're noted in the specs. That's how Dezurik ships them as our standard. Here's just the electrical layout for the electricians. If they ever need more detail, this is along with the drawing, this is in the O&Ms for the switch. Now we'll kind of do a quick overview of the instruction manuals for use with the plug valves. This instruction manual covers the 4-inch to 20-inch plug valve. Once again, we'll just kind of do a quick run through on this valve. You got your 6 bonnet bolts, your adjustment for your packing gland, your packing stud bolts, and your plug journal. On all the instruction manuals, you'll find a table of contents detailing the below mentioned. Basically what we're going to cover is any lubrication to the packing, plug journals, and the packing adjustment and or replacement. If you ever have any questions about the valve installation, if it's installed correctly, here's where you can go in the instruction manuals. This is Dezurik's recommendation. This is for the liquids and the gases. You always want the higher pressure pushing the bottom of the plug into the seat on both sides. And the word seat is cast on the seat end of the body. Describing it right here. This is Dezurik's recommendation for liquids with suspended solids. This would be an example of a pump check valve. As the pump turns on, it applies pressure, pushing the plug into the seat, opens up, continues flow. And on this drawing diagram right here, it has the plug opening to the top of the body. You always want that, so as this valve is opening, it's cleaning itself off and staying clean up on the top of the valve. If it was opening down, you would have all them solids getting rubbed on the plug face, potentially causing damage to the plug face and or tearing the rubber, causing the valve to leak. In all the O&Ms, there's a portion for lubrication. The plug journals are lubricated at the factory with food grade grease during the installation. Once they're in operation, they do not need to be lubricated unless they're completely torn apart. If they go to remove the plugs and reinstall them, just put a slight coating of food grade grease on them, along with the packing. If you ever remove the packing, before you install it, apply a thin layer of food grade grease. Now we'll cover replacing the packing. In the instruction manual it has it with removing the actuator and without. If possible, I would suggest to remove the actuator. Once again, making sure that there is no pressure or flow in the pipeline. Because once you remove that packing, whatever's in the line is going to come out of that, is potentially going to blow that packing out and or cause a mess. To do that, you remove the packing gland via the two nuts on top. You can also look in the instruction manual on how to remove the actuator. It'll give you detailed instructions as well as covering how to remove the packing. Basically, you remove the gland, use a screwdriver or a corkscrew, install it into the old packing, pry up the old packing, clean out the packing surface, install the new packing, and reinstall the valve and actuator combination. If you have any questions while doing this, you can call Dezurik. Field service can walk you through everything on step by step on what you have to do. Here's a drawing of the packing, what it looks like. On the bottom, the first piece that will be installed will be the male packing adapter. And then you have packing rings. Now this displays 3 packing rings. The larger the valve, the more packing rings. And on the top you'll have a female packing adapter. How this works is the gland pushes down on the packing, causes these V's to open up, and that's what makes your sealing surface. So the more compression on the top ring, the wider these are going to open up, the better the sealing surface is. But if you put too much torque on your packing gland, that'll cause these to open up too far, causing torques to increase on the valve for the open and close. So you just snug them up enough until you get some leakage, tighten if needed, and if you have no leakage, you're complete. On the 2-inch nut operating valves without the G-Series actuator, those valves have a friction cone. This is the friction cone and how it's installed. Underneath the gland compresses the friction cone. Your packing is down here, so that you want that just to ride snug, not too tight because you'll crack that friction cone and potentially increase your torques.